Hello, students. Welcome to my lecture on the Protestant Reformation. All right, we are in the 1500s Western Europe. First, let's have a quick vocabulary lesson. Protestant. Let's break this word down. Let's look at protest. To protest, hopefully you know what that word means. To protest means to go against. Reformation. Let's just look at reform, means to change. So if we put those two words together, to protest and to change. So we're going to protest something, we're going to change something. Okay, that's all you need to know so far. We're going to protest against something, and we're going to change something in Western Europe. All right, now what is that something? Religion, one of Mrs. Gibbons' favorite topics of conversation, favorite topics of study is religion. Yay! Okay, so hopefully I have drilled into your brain that up until this time in Western Europe, to be a human being means to be Roman Catholic. If you're in Western Europe, let's look at a map. And I'm just typing in France because it's quick to pull up the map. This part of the world, let's look at Germany and go straight down to Italy. Let's take Italy and over. All of this area, if you lived in this part of the world, you were Roman Catholic. That's it. There was no questioning it. If you were born a human, you were Roman Catholic. That was it. So, and the Catholic Church controlled everything. Everything. They controlled every aspect of your life. Well, every once in a while, there might be one person here or there, somebody kind of like this lady here that might kind of speak out against the church and say, hey, we should make some changes. I don't think the church is exactly right when they tell us, I don't know, to do this, to do that. And they would protest against a particular church teaching. But the church always squashed them down. And there was this one particular guy in England in the 1300s named John Wycliffe. And he actually got pretty popular for a while. He went on some pretty wild rants against the church through writings and sermons. In the 1300s and got pretty popular. Now, he was a Catholic preacher, a Catholic priest, but he was very loud and active against the church. And he got a big following, but never really big enough. And eventually he died. Everybody that followed him died, and the Catholic Church reigned supreme again, and everybody forgot about him. I mean, not everybody, because here I am a whole bunch of years later. It's 2021, and he was alive in the 1300s, and I'm teaching you about him. So everybody didn't forget about him, but the Catholic Church won. But let's fast forward 200 years later, and in 1517, more people started speaking out against the church. Actually, I'm going to erase this. Oh, didn't mean to erase that. I'm going to leave Roman Catholic up there. All right. Roman Catholic. Okay, so we're in the 1500s. The Catholic Church at this time is so corrupt. Oh my goodness, it is so corrupt. They are doing all kinds of things. Do you remember a few lectures ago, I remember I told you that the Catholic Church used to hoard land. They would take lots and lots and lots of land for their monasteries, for their churches. And sometimes monarchs, like kings and queens and nobles and such, would take land away from the church and give it to peasants. Sometimes Catholic priests would plot and scheme, and they would have monarchs actually killed to save their land. I mean, these church people, some of them were bad people. They would do things like, so Catholic priests are supposed to be celibate. That means they're not allowed to marry. And inside the Catholic Church, you're not allowed to have sex unless you're married. So, which means they weren't allowed to have sex. But they would have girlfriends. They would have children outside of marriage. They would, I mean, not only girlfriends. I mean, Catholic priests were hanging out at whorehouses. It was bad. They were, I mean, really, it was bad. They were doing all kinds of things. And one really particularly corrupt thing that Catholic priests were doing was they were selling indulgences. What are indulgences, Mrs. Gibbons? Okay. This hopefully will blow your mind. Indulgences. An indulgence is a way to get into heaven. Hopefully you know what heaven is, but I know some of you are not religious, so I'm going to explain it. In the Christian faith, Christians believe that inside your body, there is a soul, this intangible thing you can't actually touch, but it's inside your body. And when you die, your soul goes on to live forever. And it is the essence of who you are as a person. Like your conscience, who your actual identity, existence, like who you are more than just your flesh, is your soul. And your soul will go on to live for eternity after your physical body dies. And there are two places that your soul could go on to after your physical body dies. One is heaven, where you get to go and live and be in the presence of God and the angels, and everything is happy and perfect, and everything is wonderful. If you live a good, wonderful, pure, righteous life here on earth, then you go and live with God and the angels for eternity. But if you live a bad, evil life here on earth, then you go and live in hell for eternity, which is full of, depending on which exact Christian faith you are, some say it's full of torture, and some simply say it is the absence of God for eternity. Some say the absence of God is torture, but I don't have time to get into a religious philosophical debate with myself for the next hour. Anyway, there's heaven or hell. And of course, everyone wants to go to heaven. So, Catholic priests were selling for money a ticket to heaven. And that's called indulgences. And it's so absurd. Then they took an extra step. This one guy, this one priest in particular, was saying, step right up, buy your indulgences. I'll even sell you indulgences for your dead ancestors. So let's say, think of some family story that your, I don't know, grandmother has told you about some old jerk of a family member that you have. Your great uncle that was a complete jerk that nobody liked and is dead. Well, that person is probably not in heaven because he was a jerk and nobody liked him. This priest was saying, you could pay money. You could pay money to the priest to get that old great uncle access to heaven. Okay, so that ultimately made this guy, Martin Luther, so furious that he was like seeing red and so mad that he could not control his anger. And he picked up a pen and picked up paper and furiously scribbled down everything that was wrong with the Catholic Church. And he wrote it all down. And the story goes that he marched right up to the Catholic Church and he pounded his list of 95 theses. That's theses, Theses, 95 theses. This means 95 complaints to the door of the church. And he said, this is what's wrong with the Catholic Church today. And then he got a whole following and eventually started his own church. And that's the Lutheran Church. So that guy's name is Martin Luther. And in all actuality, there's no real proof that he actually marched up to the church and pounded his list into the door of the church. But it makes for a really good story, and that is how the story goes. So like you'll read that in the storybooks, and you'll probably read it in a history book sometime. Nobody really knows if he really did that, but he did really write 95 theses, and quickly, rapidly, his 95 theses were spread everywhere. And he quickly got a mass following and pretty quickly started this whole, like his whole own sect. He got his own religion. And still today, there's the Lutheran Church. So it was the first major split off from the Catholic Church in Western Europe. What the first Protestant church in Western Europe was the Lutheran Church. And I'm just looking at my notes to see what I need to say next. Yes, sorry. What I really, everything I just said was true, but listen to what I'm saying first. Martin Luther was not trying to start his own church. He wasn't trying to. He didn't want to start his own church. What he wanted was to reform the Catholic Church. He was a Catholic priest. He was like, whoa, 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 hey, the Catholics have gone way off. What is going on? Catholic priests are hanging out with prostitutes. Catholic priests are selling people's way into heaven. We need to stop this. We need to go back to what the Catholics are supposed to be. Well, the Pope all of that was in 1517. In 1521, the Pope, that's the leader of the Roman Catholic Church, the Pope told him to stop saying all this stuff. Stop saying all these things you're saying about the Catholic Church. Well, Martin Luther said, no, I'm not going to do that. You need to tell these priests to start to do what I'm saying. And the Pope excommunicated him. Excommunication is the absolute worst thing that can happen to a Catholic. It completely removes you from the church. It means to excommunicate someone means you are no longer a member of the Catholic Church. It would be like, I don't know, what if your parents kicked you out of your family and refused to ever speak to you ever again, and absolutely no one in your family would ever speak to you again. None of your brothers, your sisters, none of your cousins, none of your aunts, none of your uncles, none of your grandparents, no one in your family would ever, for as long as you live, ever speak to you ever again. That's excommunication. So Martin Luther was excommunicated from the Catholic Church. And that's when the Lutheran Church was formed. All right. So shortly after that, in 1524, there was a Peasants Revolt. And they sorry, I lost my train of thought for a second. There was a Peasants Revolt. Oh, this was in Germany. There was a Peasants Revolt. In fact, I don't think I mentioned this. All of this was in Germany. Martin Luther is in Germany. Sorry if I didn't mention that before. Sorry, Martin Luther, Germany. There was a Peasants Revolt, and because the peasants, the poor people, really, really supported Martin Luther. And the reason the poor people supported Martin Luther was because the Catholic Church was very wealthy, and the Catholic Church always supported the rich. The rich supported the church, and the church supported the rich. And so the poor people were going to support anybody that was against the Catholic Church. And the poor people made a mistake. The poor people assumed that Martin Luther supported them. Big mistake. So the peasants revolted against the Catholic Church. The peasants were revolting against society. Hopefully, I don't have to go into what they were revolting against. It's the same thing that peasants always revolt against. I shouldn't have to tell you guys what the peasants were revolting against. I've lectured enough since September about what peasants revolt against. They were poor people revolting against rich people. Same old, same old, same old, same old, same old. They were revolting against that. But they thought Martin Luther was going to have their back. Well, he didn't. Martin Luther was a rich guy, and he supported the rich people. So, with Martin Luther's blessing, the nobles just went in and bulldozed, squashed the peasants. Tens of thousands of peasants were killed. Thousands and thousands more peasants were left homeless. And the Peasants' Revolt was completely destroyed. It was awful. It left the peasants completely just lost and completely demoralized. They thought Martin Luther was going to be their hero, and he was just another rich guy. But still today in Germany, so shortly after that, there were all these kind of scuffles in Germany over who was going to pick what religion. If this is Germany, in the north, most people chose to be in the north, most people chose to be Lutheran. And in the south, most people chose to be Catholic. And it's still that way today. You guys, if you ever go to visit, Germany, it's still that way today. If you are in Germany and you're in the south of Germany, you can absolutely you can just assume that if you're talking to someone, they're Catholic. And if you're in the north of Germany and you're talking to someone, you can just assume they're Lutheran. It's really, truly, it's very much, very, very, very much culturally, in the south, they're Catholic, and in the north, they're Lutheran. All right. And in Switzerland, let's look at a map. I like to look at maps. So here's Germany. And just so you know, if we were to draw a line, right? See right here, here's Prague, and how there's a little jut that comes out right here. This line right here, if we draw a line right about here, the southern part here, this is Catholic. Northern part up here, it's all Lutheran. And then if we come down here to Switzerland, it's a kind of small country. Switzerland is where we're talking about now. And in the 1530s, they had their own Reformation. This guy named John Calvin started a Calvinist, and the big thing you want to remember about John Calvinist is the word predestination. Just remember the word predestination. This is a big one. This is another one of those words that it's really important. You're gonna get this again when you go to university. I promise. I promise you, there's a whole lot of stuff that you have to learn in my class, because it's my job to teach it to you and it's my job to test you. But I'm gonna be completely honest with you. You might not ever really have to use it really again. It's good for you to know this stuff. But some things that I teach you, I promise you're going to see this again. And this is one of them. John Calvin and predestination. You're gonna see this again. And this is it. 1530s, John Calvin, predestination. You're gonna see this again in university. Predestination is the idea that God has already decided. God already knows of all human beings, of all times. He already knows who's going to heaven and who's not. So out of you and me and everyone that's not even born yet, God already knows which one of us is going to heaven and which one of us is going to hell. He already knows. And so it's our jobs to live as if we're all going to heaven. And it all makes sense to them. I am not a Calvinist. I do not believe in predestination, and it's all a very interesting thing to me. but and I would love to give you a very, very long lecture on it. We don't have time for that, and you probably don't want me to give you a very long lecture on predestination. That's the very simple S2 level predestination description, all you need. You need to know 1530s, John Calvin, predestination. Predestination is the idea that God has already determined, like when you were still in your mother's womb, God already knew whether you were going to heaven or hell. It doesn't matter what you do right now. It doesn't matter if you pass my test or don't pass my test. It doesn't matter if you cheat on the test or don't cheat on the test. None of that matters. Well, no, it does matter. It does matter, but it's all very confusing what they believe, but God already knows. He knew before you were born. Just remember that. Okay, and okay, we're getting there, we're getting closer. Okay, there were new Protestant sects. New Protestant sects. Sects, this means like a group, different groups of Protestants popping up all over Europe. So a sect, there were different kinds of Protestants. Like, I'm a Protestant, and like here's a group of Protestants, and here's a group of Protestants, and here's a group of Protestants. These are protesting Catholics, and these are protesting Catholics, and these are protesting Catholics, but they're not exactly the same. They're protesting a little differently, and they're protesting a little differently, and they're protesting a little differently. All over Europe. They're popping up all over Europe. The most radical, really, really radical, the most extremist, very, very different from the Catholics were called the Anabaptist. Anabaptist. Just know this word and know that they were the most radical, the very, very extreme, polar opposite, different from the Catholics, were the Anabaptists. Now I'm going to talk about England for a bit. I had mentioned this guy, John Wycliffe, before. There was John Wycliffe in the 1300s, but it wasn't until the 1500s and King Henry VIII. King Henry VIII in England that actually broke away from the Catholic Church in England. And how did he do that? And why did he do that? So let's scratch out John Wycliffe. King Henry VIII. In the 1500s, I'm going to erase this. England was a Roman 100% Roman Catholic country in all the way up until 1527, until, so King Henry VIII in 1527, King Henry VIII only had one child that was still alive. Remember, at this time, people would have lots and lots of kids, but lots and lots of kids died. So he only had one that was still alive at this time, and it was a girl. Her name was Mary Tudor. King Henry VIII was married to a woman named Mary of Aragon of Spain. They had been married for 18 years, and they had one daughter. Her name was Mary Tudor. And, you know, at this time, they always wanted male sons. They want male sons. They wanted male heirs. So he wanted a son. He wanted a son big time. And he had King Henry had fallen in love with a young woman named, I'm going to go over here, named Anne Boleyn. Well, there's a little problem. Catholics aren't allowed to get divorced. That's not allowed in Catholicism. In Catholicism, the only way that you can end a marriage is this thing called an annulment. And an annulment has to be a really, really, really special circumstance. Like, I don't know, maybe if your spouse is severely mentally ill, maybe the priest might give you an annulment. It has to be something, I mean, really serious. Then the priest, you know, might let you out of your marriage. But other than that, you're not getting out of your marriage. To a Catholic, marriage is for life, for better or worse, for sickness or health. You said I do. You're married for life. Well, King Henry was like, I'm the king and I want out of this marriage. And the Protestants had started allowing divorces in their religion. And so King Henry was kind of looking over at the Protestants and was like, hey, I'm kind of, those Protestants are looking okay now. And suddenly he thinks that's looking pretty good. So what does he do? King Henry kicks the Pope. He kicks the Catholic Church out of England and names himself the head of the Church of England. I am not kidding you. That's what he does. King Henry VIII kicks the Pope, kicks the Catholic Church out of England, and names himself the head of the Church of England. And now there is the official Church of England, and the King of England is the head of it. And he grants himself a divorce, so he's no longer married to Mary of Aragon, and he marries Anne Boleyn. And then he ends up, eventually he divorces her too and marries somebody else, and blah, 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 blah. He marries some other women and has some kids. And then for years and years and years, there are fights in England over the people that want England to be a Catholic country and the people that want England to be Church of England. And there are still people that argue about that. Today, people are like, no, we're Catholic, no, we're Church of England, Catholic, Church of England, blah, 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 blah. And then it's 2021. There are also a bunch of people that are like, no, whatever, religion's dumb. We don't need to be religious at all. And some people, whatever. But the really important part is that King Henry wanted a divorce and the Pope wouldn't let him have one. And so he just kicked the Pope and kicked the entire Catholic Church out of England and said, now I'm the head of the Church of England. And he granted himself a divorce. And then the Catholic Church itself had a major freak out because all these people were leaving Catholicism. So many people were leaving Catholicism because of this Protestant Reformation. And it was because the Catholic Church had gone bad. The Catholic Church had gone really bad. And so the Catholic Church had its own Reformation. They had a Counter-Reformation. And that means to go against the Reformation. So because the Reformation was going against Catholicism. So this is to go against going against Catholicism. So the counter going against Catholicism. Hopefully that makes sense, because the Reformation is going against Catholicism. And to counter something means to go against it. So this is to go against going against Catholicism. So the Counter-Reformation is to try to fix Catholicism. Sorry, I'm going to explain that one more time. Catholicism was all messed up. Was all messed up. So people started to leave. This is called the Reformation. The Reformation is Catholicism was all messed up, so people started to leave. The Counter-Reformation was Catholics trying to fix Catholicism so people would quit leaving. All right, it's really important that you know the difference in the Reformation and the Counter-Reformation. The Reformation was Catholicism was all messed up. So people left and became Protestants. The Counter-Reformation was Catholics trying to fix Catholicism so people would quit leaving. Okay, bye guys.